Welcome, Blake.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here today, listeners. We have Blake Author Peel. He is a fantasy author, and I'm super excited to dive into your books. I looked and saw that you have tons of fantasy books and some very exciting special editions coming out, but I didn't dive in too much because I want to hear everything from the source.
Yeah, of course.
So, your book that's coming out, that's a special edition hardcover at Bar, is it exclusively Barnes and Noble, or
No,
it's going to be
it's
everywhere?
everywhere books are sold.
Okay, fine. So the book is Fall of Radiance, and it's your first book you ever published, and it must be hugely popular because to be on a third edition hardcover in Barnes and Noble, like I am not worthy. So dive in, tell us all the characters, the world, all of the fun things.
Yeah, so yeah, this is it right here. Fall of Radiance. The first book is called Ranger's Oath. And like you said, it's the first book I ever wrote. Um, the first time I published it, it was just self-published. And I did the cover design. I edited it, self-edited and stuff. And um, I didn't really know what I was doing. I just kind of wanted to be an author, so I wrote a book and put it out there for the world. And then a few years later, I got connected with Athon Books, Steve Bollier and Rhett Bruno, and they picked me up for a new series that I was writing. But I think it was Steve who looked at my backlog and he said, "Hey, we have this Fall of Radiance." At the time, it was called Arc of Radiance. I had a different title, but he said, "You have this Radiance series that you wrote. Why don't we republish that as well? Like we can give it a fresh coat of paint, get our editors on it, kind of give it a new shot at life sort of thing." And so that was back in 2020 is when Ranger's Oath got kind of republished under Athon. And that series is actually my best performing series out of all the books I've written. And I just finished probably my 15th or 16th book I've written. And far and away, my most popular series is the first one I ever wrote. So
Wow.
that's pretty cool. But one of the cool things was when we were going through the publishing process with Athon, Steve was asking me, "Hey, do you have any ideas for like audiobook narrators? Like, do you have any preferences?" And I said, "Well, of course, like my bucket list audiobook narrator would be Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. They did the Wheel of Time series. They do a lot of Brandon Sanderson's um, audiobooks like Stormlight Archive, and I think Michael Kramer did Mistborn as well. I'd have to double check on that, but I said, "Hey, that's my bucket list, but I don't really have a preference." And he said, "Well, let me reach out to Michael and see if he's interested." And they reached out to Michael Kramer
Oh,
and Kate Redding. They sent him a copy of the manuscript. They were interested, and so they did the series for that. So that was like a huge thing for me because they were like my dream narrators, and the fact that they narrated my first series I ever wrote was very cool. And so now, 5 years later, Athon has merged with Vault, and they were able to get a distribution agreement with Simon and Schuster, and they basically picked out of all the books that they've published, they've picked different series to go into bookstores, and mine was one of the ones they picked, and so that's where we're here. Book one comes out March 3rd, and then book two is going to be coming out a few months later. And so it's just kind of a whirlwind. I'm still kind of getting used to the idea, but really excited for these books to hit bookstore shelves.
that is super exciting. Do you get to do signings too? Are you gonna be in some stores in person?
Yes, so Athon has very kindly, they've been setting up book signings and different events for me to go to here in Southern California. I live in Southern California, and so I'll be going to like Huntington Beach, City of Orange, San Diego, Barnes and Nobles, and some other like more independent booksellers. And so I'm very excited, very nervous about that. I've never done a book signing before, so this is all pretty new to me, but yeah, I'm excited to see what happens.
That's super fun. I'm sure like your fans of the series are gonna love like meeting the person. So I'm always the same. I fangirl for girl on my author.
Yeah. Well, I do too. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to be on the other side of that. And yeah, yeah, it's very exciting time.
Fun, fun. Well, tell us about the characters, the premise of the series, what we expect if we are going to start reading.
Yeah. So, one reviewer on Audible, I believe it was, said that this series is like Wheel of Time light. And they said that in their review. And I actually thought that was a really, really good way to describe this series because it does, it is like an epic fantasy. It follows a lot of the same tropes that you see in a lot of big, sprawling epic fantasy universes. But Radiance is written more like a young adult series. And it's a lot, obviously, it's not as thick and dense as some of these other epic fantasy books. So it's a lot lighter. It's a lot more character driven. There is a plot and there are things that happen in the story that are, that follow sort of that pattern that you see in epic fantasies with like different factions vying for control and stuff like that. But it's very character driven. And I think it's more approachable than some of these big epic fantasy books. Um, it follows the two main protagonists, Owen, who's a ranger's apprentice, and then Zara, who is a mage. And it alternates between their two POVs, their 2 points of view, almost chapter by chapter. We'll get an Owen chapter, then we'll get a Zara chapter. And at first, they start out in separate places, and then eventually they meet up, and then, as the plot unfolds. But the premise of Radiance is it's kind of like a post-apocalyptic world almost, where the last surviving kingdom on this world is encased in a giant dome of energy. So if you can imagine, the kingdom itself is protected from the outside world because 1,000 years ago the world was destroyed. And this is the map, and you can kind of see the
Yeah.
kingdom is in this big circular shield of energy called the Arc of Radiance. And for 1,000 years, this kingdom's been kind of protected from the demons that destroyed the world 1,000 years ago. And early in the book, so this isn't really a spoiler, but Owen discovers that the Ark has been breached, and that demons who thought to have been extinct, they've kind of faded into myth. They're starting to get through, and so you know, that's kind of the linchpin that starts this series of events where Owen and Zara, they have to kind of convince these different factions inside the kingdom to, take the threat seriously and hey, this really is happening. And we're gonna have to band together if we're gonna hope to avoid a second apocalypse sort of thing. So that's kind of like your crash course in the plot. But it's a 5 book series. They're all about this length. And there is a prequel novella that happens 1,000 years prior to the events of book one. And I believe if you pre-order this, you can get a free download of the prequel novella, as well as like a limited edition bookmark, which is kind of a cool deal.
That is a cool bonus. Yeah, I love prequels because then you can kind of, So do you think you should read the prequel first or should you read the series first?
It's not required reading. It's more just like a little extra flavor. Like it kind of gives you a little bit more background for this world that you're entering into. So I would say either or. Like you can read
Okay,
it first, or you can read the mainline series and then go back and it kind of just enhances the experience, I guess.
fun. So Owen and Zara's point of view, is that third person point of view or is it first person?
It's first person, which is
Okay.
interesting. Most of my series are third person limited, past tense. I think that's kind of the standard in fantasy. This is first person present tense. So it's happening, as it happens, and you're inside their head. Which is kind of cool because you kind of get more of a feel for the feelings that the main characters have, their thought process. You're seeing things through their eyes, and I'm not really sure why I picked present tense first person. That's just kind of when I started writing the story. That's just sort of what I went with, and so. But most of my other series are more of a third person classic perspective. But this one, yep, you get the first person present tense.
I like that POV because it's my favorite one, I'll just say. But
Yeah.
just because you get up close with the characters and you know what
Yeah.
they're feeling, and sometimes it can give more the element of surprise, like
Hmm.
you know only what they know, right? So
Yeah.
you're just as surprised as something coming out of left field as they are at the time, right?
Exactly. If it's done well too, it can almost be more immersive than that third person perspective. But I like both. I think my next series that I'm going to write, I'm going to go back to first person because I've been reading James Islington's Will of the Many and Strength of the Few, his new epic fantasy that just came out, and that's in a first person perspective. And so I was like, oh man, I kind of want to go back to that for my next series, but we'll see.
Interesting. Yeah, I find writing in third person much harder. So, do you find one harder than the other one, or
Not
no?
really. I do find if I'm working on multiple projects and one is first person and one is third person, I do cross wires and like I'll mess up. I'll be writing and then all of a sudden I'm back in first person when I'm not supposed to be. And so I think it's probably better to just focus on one and finish that project. And then if you're going to switch, then do that after. But
Right. Yeah, you always have that problem of past, present, first, third. Yeah,
yeah, it can get
I get that.
confusing.
Right. Fine. Well, I was looking at your social media, and you're so prolific of connecting with fans and talking about what you're reading and all of those things. It's just super impressive and super fun.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of new to this social media thing. Andy Peliquin, who's a other fantasy author, he kind of inspired me to start posting, and my wife does a little bit of social media posting too. So I was like, I gotta. In this day and age, I think authors kind of have to start doing that. And so it started kind of as an obligation, but now I'm having more fun with it as I'm learning how to make videos and stuff. So it can kind of, I think, enhance those who want to read my books. I think by consuming my or watching my Instagram content, you'll kind of get more of an idea of where I come from when I write my stories, what books I like, what things I find inspiring versus things that I don't like in modern fantasy writing. And so it can kind of give you more of like a broad perspective of where the author's coming from.
All right, fine. And do you find that you have certain themes in your series or your books, or and do you start with those, or do they kind of just emerge as you're writing?
That's a great question. I do think there are themes through all my stories. I'm a very big believer in heroism, and like yeah, every person can be a hero, and as long as you stand up for what you believe is right, you know you can do incredible things. And I've seen that in my own life. I've seen heroic individuals, you know, at work and in my family and just people I've met going through life. And so, you know, I'm not a real big fan of like the morally gray protagonist or like really dark and gritty, grim, dark worlds. I do enjoy those from time to time, but when I create worlds and I read and I write, I tend to trend more towards the hopeful and inspiring. And you can kind of see that trend if you read all my different series. You know, the protagonists kind of start small. They start, you know, maybe on the weaker side, a little more timid, and then as the story progresses, they find their strength and they learn to overcome their challenges. And I love that about fantasy, sort of the heroic journey of it. And but I don't start with a theme in mind. That's the funny thing is I kind of start with the character in mind, like what kind of character and what kind of world are they going to inhabit. I have some vague ideas for plot, and then I sort of discover themes and big plot events along the way. I'm like a mix between um, a pantser and a plotter. Like I'm like right in the middle because I do need some sort of a plot when I start writing, but then I also like having the room for exploration where I can kind of jump into the story and say, well, okay, wait a minute. They're faced with this challenge. Like, what if they did this? You know, I don't want to be like forced into a box when I write, you know, by a very rigid outline. I kind of like having the freedom to explore things. And some things just happen in the moment, you know, and they come to me as I'm writing. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Um, so yeah, I think I like to discover things along the way, and themes included.
Yeah, I love that. I think we align on a lot of those things. Like I call my characters heroism or heroism, like sort of like my podcast is titled Finding the Magic. And I like to inspire people to find their own magic, like
Mhm.
whatever brand of magic that is, like whatever makes you special or whatever makes you passionate or excited, and like bringing that into your own life to make change in your own world, right? Or
Mhm.
even for just yourself. So I love that idea of heroism, a heroism. And I'm very much like you. Like one time I tried to do an outline and I was like, I'm bored. I can't even do this anymore. Like it wasn't gonna happen. I wasn't gonna write that way. So
Yeah.
that's super fun to be able to like you know where you're going, but maybe you make up how you're gonna get there. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's more of a guideline than a rule, right? It's more guidelines
Yeah.
than rules. That's kind of how I look at it.
So you said your fantasy is more like YA. Are the characters YA ages?
Mhm.
And is it all YA content so your 13 plus year old can pick them up and read them? Or are they adult characters and just kind of YA content?
Yeah, so this series is more YA. Most of the stuff I write is your standard adult fantasy.
Okay.
Um, Not that it's got like a lot of rated R content in it, but there is violence that occurs. There is some PG-13 language that gets used. This series in particular, the two main characters are YA age. They're in their late teens. I don't really specifically say how old they are. I don't te I tend to stay away from like those sorts of details when I write. I kind of like leaving things vague and up to the imagination. But yeah, main characters are YA age. I do think it's appropriate for middle school, high school age people to read this series. There's no like gratuitous cursing or sex or anything like that in this series. But there is a little bit of violence, if you're uncomfortable with people fighting demons and the odd decapitation, then you may feel uncomfortable, but it is I would say it's like a PG-13 movie in a book. That's what I would
Fun. Well,
define.
you could always skim that paragraph, right?
True. Yeah. Yeah, I never tend to get too gratuitous with violence in my books either.
Right. Well, this series sounds amazing. Fall of Radiance is the series with Ranger's Oath coming out in March, and then the
Mhm.
second one, special edition, coming out in April. What about your other series, Frost World? I think I saw that one. Talk to me about that one.
Yeah, Frost World is an epic fantasy, but it's also like a lit RPG. So for those unfamiliar, lit RPGs, literary like role-playing games. It's got game-like elements in the story. So the main character literally like levels up and gets like better gear and stuff. Frostworld's actually the series that kind of got me in the door with Aethon. And then they looked back and said, "Hey, let's also publish Fall of Radiance." And so I think they kind of got published around the same time together. But Frostworld takes place. It's like a Viking style world. It's literally like if you imagine a world covered in ice and snow with Viking clan holds and a rigid caste system. That's sort of the world that Frostworld is built on. The main character's name is Jarl. He starts out as a lowly farmer, and through sheer grit and determination, he sort of levels up and goes on this journey to fight an existential threat that's threatening all the clan holds. And that one's a really fun read too. Very different from Fall of Radiance. That one is more adult oriented. Not that there's anything gratuitous in it, but I would not classify Frostworld as a YA story.
Fun. Okay, I have to tell you, this is a funny story because obviously we mostly know what cosplay is. You dress
Mhm.
up, you pretend to be characters, and lit RPG, it's kind of the same for me. Like, I have never, I mean, I've seen a lot of people do it, been to bunches of cons, but never dressed up myself, right? So, in all this time, I wondered, like, cosplay, where did that word come from? Like, literally just yesterday, I was driving my car, I was like, costume, you dressed up in costumes. Oh, it's cosplay costume. Never mind. I am
See,
like,
I didn't know that. You just taught me that. I actually didn't know where that word came from.
and my husband was like, yes, I knew this for years. I was like, okay, I am
Yeah.
so embarrassed about this. But yeah, so when I've always wondered about these game-based books because I was wondering, okay, are you playing the game? The people aren't playing the game in the book. They're still living their lives, right?
Hmm.
It's just that they have elements of gaining more tools maybe to go along their quest by achieving certain things in the
Yeah.
book, I guess, right? Is their
Yeah.
society kind of structured that way so that they know the rules of the society and they know if they achieve this one level, then they'll get to this next level? It's sort of like in a job, right? When you achieve these skills, then you get to be manager, and you achieve these next skills, you get to be, I don't know, general manager or
Yeah.
something. Is that sort of how it's structured?
Yeah, so in Frostworld, I mentioned there's a caste system, and that is literally like where the leveling and the classes you could say comes from. So you have like your farmer caste down at the bottom, and they can't like progress and get stronger as they, because they're born into it. And then you have your warrior caste or class called the Battleborn, and then you have like your sorcerer caste or class called the Fireborn. And the whole point of Frostworld is Jarl is born as a farmer. And so he can't go on to become a warrior and win glory because he was born into this rigid caste system. But he finds a way to break out of that and to become a Battleborn. And I don't want to give away too much, but basically he learns how to change his life's course and then kind of level up from there. And that's I don't know. It's an interesting story. Every book series that I've ever written has been different from the last, and maybe it's just because I just like variety and I like changing things up. But but that was kind of my first foray into the lit RPG progression fantasy genre.
And do you play the games too? So you're kind of new that world, or you just like learned as you go?
Yeah, no, I play games just like most people, and Skyrim, I guess you could say, was a big inspiration for Frostworld because it has that Norse Viking kind of vibe. But yeah, I've always played D&D and video games and stuff, so it kind of came naturally to me to write a story like that. But my newest story that I'm writing right now, um, that is more just like your traditional classic high fantasy. There's no lit RPG elements to it. So yeah, I kind of bounce all over the place, and so that's why when people ask me, what genre do you write? I just say fantasy.
Yeah.
I write fantasy, all different flavors of it.
Put it in a bucket. Well, you'll laugh at me because my kids laugh at me there. I haven't moved beyond Wii video games. So that's
Oh,
my that's all my skill that I have.
nothing
So
wrong with that.
of course everybody plays video games unless you're challenged. Well, those all sound amazing. So you have Fall of Radiance, Frost World. I think I saw Sage World too. Is that a different series?
Sagewood, Sagewood.
Wood, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, that one is also very different from all my other series. I wrote that one with my wife, actually. We co-authored that together. And that one it's also kind of lit RPG, but more like your isekai portal fantasy, progression fantasy. Basically, the main character, Matt, he's a normal guy living on Earth, living his life, and his grandfather dies. He in the very first chapter, he just gets back from his grandfather's funeral, and his grandfather has given him a ring. He inherited a ring, and so and a letter, a very mysterious letter that his grandfather wrote. And he puts the ring on, and then he gets transported to a different world and he wakes up on a farm and the farm has fallen into disrepair and he basically inherited a farm on a fantasy world and his grandfather, you know, obviously had some secrets that he was keeping from people and so when he died, he gave this farm to Matt. And so he interacts with the population, he works the land, and he makes a bunch of magical friends along the way because it's a fantasy world. And this book, I would say, if you've played a game like Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley, like those sort of like slice of life farming RPG simulation type games, you would probably like Sagewood. It's a little bit, it's more lighthearted than my other books. The stakes aren't as high. There's a lot more humor in it. It's kind of more of that slice of life sort of vibe compared to some of my other more epic fantasy type books. But Sagewood's a lot of fun too. And like I said, I wrote that with my wife, and that was a very fun experience.
That seems really neat. I am wondering now if you ever sleep.
Ah, yeah, not as much as I should.
And you said you sometimes you bounce between projects. You're working on similar projects or say a couple of projects at one time. Um, do you like go back and forth between your series so you're kind of moving all those along?
Not often. Sometimes I
Okay.
have to, and like sometimes, for example, I'm editing a project, like it's done, but I get the manuscript back from the editor, but I'm working on another project now, and so and if this one's first person and this one's third person, then I can cross my wires. But generally, I like to focus on one thing at a time, and yeah, all these books I've written over the course of like 10 years, and so I'm not as prolific as some other authors out there. There are some people that I'm like, how do you write that much? It's crazy. Um, but yeah, I try to focus on one thing at a time, get a certain number of words per day, and just try to be consistent with it.
Fun. So what comes next after your special edition launches of Fall of Radiance for you?
So I have a new epic fantasy. I mentioned this earlier. It's called the Godsworn Trilogy. Michael Kramer is going to be narrating this audiobook as well, just like he did for Radiance. This one is more of a classic um, high fantasy adventure. Um, I would compare it to something like the Rhaenyra Revelations or by Michael J. Sullivan, for example, or maybe even some of the more classics like the Riftwar Saga by Raymond E. Feist or the Shannara books by Terry Brooks. It's more of a classic adventure, and this kind of harkens back to Radiance because I also have a male-female protagonist, alternating points of view. Um, One is a paladin named Callum, and the other is a priestess named Aurora. And this one takes place in a world where the gods are dead, and you know, a certain number of years before, basically this sorcerer king guy overthrew the gods, named himself the only true god on earth. He's like a god king, and he kind of rules the world with an iron fist. But Callum and Aurora, they discover that the gods are not dead, and they embark on a quest to try to bring their goddess back. And they go on this cross-country adventure, meeting interesting people along the way, getting chased by the bad guys, and it's a really good book. Not to, sorry, toot my own horn here, but I will say of all the books I've written, I would say this is probably the one I'm most excited about, and I've been working on it for a long time. I'm really excited for it to come out. Books one and two are done. They're off with the editor. I'm hoping maybe later this year a release, maybe early next year. I'm currently working on book three right now, so it'll be a trilogy. And these ones are big. These are the biggest books I've ever written. Book one's 160,000
Oh,
words.
wow.
Book two's over 200,000 words, and book three will be even bigger. So these are big, chunky, epic fantasy books.
Well, you can see my cat approves. He's very interested.
Good.
We love those big chunky. Okay, something bad is going to happen if he sits there. Sorry about
That's
that.
okay.
Yesterday I was on a call and he punched the wrong button and it died. So
Oh,
we don't
geez.
want that to happen. Though,
No.
yeah. So re-say the name of that series so I can make sure I remember it.
God Sworn. So,
God's Sworn. Okay.
yeah, God Sworn trilogy.
That all of your work sounds amazing. I'm going to spend way too much money today. um, author Blake Arthur Peel. Tell us where we can find you and all of your books.
Yeah, so everything's on Amazon and Audible. You can go to my website, has all my books listed. Find me on social media at Blake Arthur Peel. Uh, yeah, I mean, just go on Audible. I'm always pushing audiobooks. That's how I consume books nowadays. It's hard for me to find time to read physical books. I do every once in a while, but most of the time I'm listening to audiobooks, and there are just some really, really talented narrators out there that have done such a good job that I'm always like, hey, check out the audiobooks. But you can find me on Kindle Unlimited as well. And then, if hardcovers and physical books are your thing, then we have this as well coming out in just a few weeks. So yeah, you could just look me up online.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Yes, this podcast is going to launch mid-March. So I think the first book will already be out in Barnes& and Noble. So hopefully
Perfect.
people run and get their special edition. I am also a huge audiobook fan, so I will look for them there. Again, Blake, thank you so much for being here. And I hope you will come back when you have your new series out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Trisha.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.